What happens when shelter, one of our most basic human needs, is transformed into a luxury asset? Imagine a world where a home is no longer a sanctuary or a human right, but a prize in a high stakes game of wealth. We are living in that world. The very concept of having a secure roof over your head has been sacrificed at the altar of profit, and the fallout is everywhere around us. It's as if the idea of home has died, replaced by an investment strategy, the death of shelter as a human right. Real estate was once about shelter, safety, and community, a place to live and raise a family. Now it's treated like a Wall Street stock. Houses are bought and sold like trading cards, flipped for profit or hoarded by those seeking to park their money. In the United States, nearly 1 in 4 homes is now bought by investors rather than families looking for a place to live. That means a house is often not a home at all, but a speculative asset, a vessel to extract wealth. The language around housing has shifted to ROI, equity, and portfolios. Landlords and flippers thrive, while ordinary people find themselves priced out. The fundamental role of housing, to provide shelter and stability, has been hollowed out and replaced with the logic of profit. But how did we even get to this point? The commodification of homes didn't happen overnight. It was a slow motion shift that began in the late 20th century. In the post-1970s era of inflation and financial deregulation, governments and banks made a fateful choice. They pivoted away from viewing housing as a public good and started encouraging housing as an engine for economic growth. In the United States, for example, policymakers responded to the 1970s inflation by deregulating lending but still backing housing as credit, turning homes into a special asset that can rapidly appreciate in value. What had been New Deal policies to promote stable home ownership was repurposed, no longer just about providing shelter, but about fueling asset prices. Housing was deliberately turned into a wealth-building tool, a hedge against the eroding value of money. This transition created a major cultural shift. In the 1950s and 60s, a house meant stability, a place to settle down. By the 1980s and beyond, a house came to mean an investment. People were encouraged to view their home as a path to the riches. Think of the slogans like, "Your home is your biggest asset." Governments kept interest rates relatively low and offered tax incentives like mortgage deductions, pouring gasoline on the fire. In places like California, laws such as Proposition 13 locked in ultra-low property taxes for homeowners, making it lucrative to hold onto property indefinitely. At the same time, neighborhood groups fought development, strangling housing supply. The result? Existing homeowners watched their property values skyrocket, and they fiercely protected that windfall. Housing wealth became concentrated among those older, wealthier owners, largely those who bought in the 70s and 80s, while later generations found that buying a home turned into a ridiculous uphill battle. We already saw the consequences of housing as investment right large in 2008. Years of treating homes like get-rich-quick assets led to a massive speculation bubble. When it burst, it brought the global economy to its knees. The collapse of the housing market during the Great Recession displaced close to 10 million Americans from their homes. Millions of families were foreclosed on, their dreams shattered overnight. For a moment, it became brutally clear. Turning homes into casino chips had inflicted enormous pain, but even that disaster wasn't enough to reverse the course. After the dust settled, banks were bailed out and interest rates pushed down, and the housing market reinflated. The financial system treated 2008 as a hiccup, and the march toward total housing commodification resumed, stronger than ever. What does it mean for society when shelter becomes something you must compete for, like a limited edition commodity? It means that the idea of home transforms from a basic source of identity and belonging into a trophy of economic survival. When a home is just another asset, our relationships to our communities change. Neighbors aren't neighbors anymore. They're investors or temporary occupants passing through until the rent hikes. Communities fracture. The social fabric frays as houses become Airbnbs. Apartment buildings become nothing more than cash flow machines for distant owners. The sense that a home is your place in the world, that almost spiritual concept of having somewhere to belong, is lost in the noise of the market. When shelter is treated as a prize, our humanity takes a backseat. we start asking brutal questions. Can I afford to have children if I don't own a home? Will I ever feel secure, or will I be renting forever at someone else's mercy? For many, the idea of putting down roots has been replaced by a very different reality: perpetual transience, chasing ever elusive affordability. Young adults cram into parental basements or pay exorbitant rents for shoebox apartments, delaying marriages and births. The psychological toll is immense. Owning a home used to be a rite of passage, a source of pride and stability. Now it feels like a fantasy reserved for the rich or lucky. In countless minds, there's a gnawing realization that the system is rigged, that something as fundamental as a secure home is no longer guaranteed by hard work or good character. Instead, it's a roll of loaded dice in an unfair game. And what about those who fall through the cracks of this grand real estate casino? In a world that treats housing as a commodity, people without means simply get left behind. It becomes somehow normal that thousands sleep on the streets beneath the empty balconies of luxury condos. The moral outrage we should feel is dulled by the perverse logic of the market. We tell ourselves housing is a business, as if it's acceptable that a human being lives in a tent while an investor's property sits vacant because it's accruing value. When profit is God, empathy dies. What does that say about our civilization? The consequences of turning home into investment vehicles are playing out before our eyes, and they are dire. Housing affordability has plummeted. By 2023, the median house in the US costs around 6 times the median household income, up from just about 4 times a couple decades ago. This is an astonishing and historic burden. In some superstar cities, the price-to-income ratio is well into the double digits, a dystopian figure. Buying a home, once an attainable milestone for the middle class, has become a distant dream for millions. Mortgage payments now swallow such a huge chunk of income that for many, it's simply not feasible. First-time buyers are locking themselves out. Entire younger generations have been priced out of the market by the relentless rise in the prices. Ask young people about their futures. You'll hear the despair. Nearly 1 in 5 millennials say that they might never own a home, and a significant share of Gen Z feels the same hopelessness. They look at their incomes, then at the cost of a modest house, and realize the math will never work. Instead of planning for a home, they plan for lifelong renting, or maybe leaving expensive cities, or not starting a family at all. The American dream of home ownership has eroded. In its place is a kind of generational fatigue and Zionism. After all, how do you build a life when the ground underneath your feet, literally the land and shelter, is treated like a gold in a vault, only accessible to those who already have wealth? Meanwhile, rent, the only option for those who can't buy, has also soared, because when housing becomes an investment, landlords push costs to the limit to maximize returns. This leaves many renters in permanent precarity, spending half their paycheck on rent and one unexpected bill away from eviction. It's a feedback loop of inequality. Those who own property reap ever greater gains, while those who don't are stuck paying those owners, getting poorer in the process. It's feudal in a way, a new rentier class extracting tributes from peasantry. At the extreme end, we see homelessness rising, the most naked indicament of this system. Over 500,000 Americans have no home at all, living in shelters or on the streets. These numbers are creeping up year after year, a visible humanitarian crisis in the richest country on earth. And here is the statistic that should haunt us all. There are about 28 empty housing units for every 1 homeless person in the United States. Yep, that's correct. You heard that right. This ain't no BS. 28 vacant homes for each homeless individual. In total, roughly 16 million homes sit vacant across the US. Many of them investor-owned properties waiting for the right price, or second, third, fourth homes for the wealthy. The absurdity is almost too much to process. We have more than enough shelter for everyone, yet people sleep under bridges. Why? Because those empty houses are not considered shelter for those in need. They're considered investments awaiting profit. The system would rather keep them empty than house a person who can't pay. It's hard to imagine a more damning condemnation of our priorities. We have, quite literally, financialized human misery. How did shelter become the latest victim of a global system that seems to devour everything in search of profit? The answer lies in the broader mechanics of our economic order, in inflation, fiat money, and the ceaseless hunt for yield by capital. After the 1970s, money was decoupled by gold, and the floodgates of credit opened. The value of currency was expected to gradually erode. A dollar today is worth less tomorrow, so those with wealth look for assets that inflate in value to stay ahead. Real estate, tangible, traditionally safe, and crucially, limited in supply, was the perfect target. It became the investment of choice for preserving and growing wealth in an era of fiat money. Why keep cash that loses value, or bonds, when you can buy a house and watch its price climb year after year? Over the last few decades, capital, whether from global investors, pension funds, or domestic speculators, poured into housing. Banks and financial institutions played along, extending easy credit and inventing new instruments like mortgage-backed securities to monetize housing even further. Every level of the system had incentives to push housing as an asset class. Wall Street could profit, governments could boast of rising home ownership and GDP growth, and middle-class families were sold on homes as their ticket to financial security. It's the logic of what economists call rentier capitalism. Those who already hold assets, land, building, and money, can earn returns indefinitely without producing anything, while those who only have their labor keep paying into the machine. Landlords and property owners could sit back and collect rent or watch property values rise, earning money by simply owning. In the 2010s and 2020s, ultra-low interest rates made this even more extreme. Cheap mortgages fueled bidding wars and record-high prices, benefiting those with capital or equity and shutting out those without. This is a global phenomenon as well. From London to Toronto to Sydney, property markets surged as wealthy investors treated apartments and houses like safety deposit boxes for their cash. It didn't matter if those units stayed empty. What mattered was that their value kept rising. Whole cities have seen working class and young people pushed to the fingers or out entirely, as housing stock is gobbled up by those seeking returns. Even when there's a pause or a crash, the system doubles down. In the mid-2000s, foreign and domestic investors alike fueled a huge housing boom in the US, creating an unsustainable bubble. When it burst in 2008, one might think the lesson was learned. Yet the response was to bail out financial institutions, slash interest rates, and reinflate asset prices, including housing. In other words, the solution to the crisis caused by treating housing as an investment was to make housing an even more attractive investment once again. This is structural. Our economic system is locked into a pattern where capital always seeks the next source of growth, and it found a gold mine in housing. Shelter was just the next victim in line. After commodifying everything from healthcare to education, why not commodify the literal roof over our heads? So here we are, whispering from inside a crumbling civilization, looking at the wreckage of a world where homes became investments. The tragedy is profound. We have taken something sacred, the simple human need for shelter, for a place to call home, and surrendered it to the cold logic of capital. The results have been catastrophic for community, equality, and basic human dignity. And one must ask, is there any way out of this? Can we ever return to a time when a home is just a home and a place to live and love rather than a financial asset? Or have we crossed a line from which there is no return? A world where shelter will forever be ruled by the iron law of profit? It's a grim question with no easy answer. As things stand, the forces that turned real estate into a global investment juggernaut shows no signs of relenting. Reversing this trend would require immense political will and reimagining our values, treating housing as a human right to be protected, not merely another market to be exploited. Yet, looking around, one wonders if we as a society are even capable of that change. We've normalized the abnormal. Perhaps future historians will look back at this era and pinpoint it as the moment we lost something essential, when we allowed the homes of humanity to become chips in a casino, and in doing so, we gambled away our humanity. Can we ever go back? Or is this just how it's going to be? An age when the house wins and humanity loses.